Now, in both of the sell-side masterclasses, I talked specifically about running a formal sell-side process, so I'm not going to go into all the details today. But here's one of the things that I will say, specifically when you're dealing with private equity. Now that you've come up with your own game plan, you've kind of determined what your business is worth today, what your business might be worth in 5 years if you can apply all these different levers to the business. Now you're able to start sitting down with private equity firms in a process. And for me, a private equity process is slightly different than a broad process when you're dealing with both private equity firms and strategic acquirers. The more you know what you want to do, the more you're going to be in control and the better off you're going to be. And here's what I mean by that. When you whittle that playing field down from 200 private equity firms to 20. Now you can bring these guys in, and instead of them interviewing you, now you're interviewing them. Now you're sitting these guys down and they're using the douchebag playbook and telling you about, bites of the apple and turns of this and blah, 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 blah. Telling you all about their Ivy League schools that they went to and how they interned at Goldman Sachs and all this shit that you don't care about. Now you're going to be able to say, okay, private equity firm, I want to know specifically what you've done on all these various different portfolio companies that you've already researched because they're on their website. So you've read about every portfolio company. You know the individuals that actually did the deals with the private equity firm. You're going to talk to them about what sort of capabilities did they bring to the table? What were their returns on those investments? Who was on the board from the private equity firm at those companies? What sort of changes in the business? You're going to be able to get into a tremendous amount of detail and have them walk you through specifically what they were able to do to create value, because at the end of the day, money is fungible, right? Meaning anyone can come up with capital. You don't need a sophisticated private equity firm to do that. But what private equity firms do in addition to that is they bring a lot of various capabilities to your firm. And hey, listen, this is a job interview, baby. I want to know what you can do for me. And I love when clients actually take that approach. I love when clients sit there as opposed to being just very reactionary, passive, and like, I think I want to sell my business and I'm not quite sure. What can you do for me? And no, this is what I want to do. Are you the right party to help me do that? Yes or no? And if you're not, let's not waste any more time. Now, I'm not saying you need to be a dick about it. And as I say in my sell-side masterclasses, I think you need to be playful, you need to be friendly, and you need to be fun. But you're on a mission. And you have to remember that, because you will waste a lot of time. And there are thousands of private equity firms. You'll waste a tremendous amount of time on the one hand. And on the other hand, if you just answer the telemarketer who's like, hey, pool covers private equity, then you're going to end up leaving a ton of money on the table. You don't want to do that either. Again, you want to take control of the process. And when you're doing a private equity deal, again, the right way is you go through this process. You're going to get indications of interest. Like the private equity firms are going to say, hey, Michael, I love your business. Here's what we would do with it. We'll pay between X and Y. Here's how we'd structure the deal. You're going to roll, 15% of the purchase price. We're going to keep you on. We're going to keep your right-hand man on. Here are the things that we intend to do with the business. If we enjoyed our conversation, we talked about all these different levers we can pull. Here's what we'd do. Here's how we'd structure it. We'd love your opinion on our proposal. And so you'll get a handful of these. Ideally, you'll get 20 of them, right? And so you've got a lot, and you can lay them all out on the table simultaneously. You're going to say, oh, this one's a piece of shit, and this one's crap, but this one, I like these. I like the purchase price. I like what they have to say. Now we're cooking with gas. Now we can start a process. When you're contemplating a control situation, when you're contemplating a private equity firm buying a majority stake in a business, a controlled process works quite well. When you're doing a minority interest in a business, when you're going to do a growth equity investment, a controlled process sucks, actually. And I would largely advise people not to use formal processes when you're taking on a 20% equity partner. Shit, you're not giving up a ton of equity. So, you don't have to extract every nickel off the table here. And what you're doing is you're forming a partnership with a minority investor. It's really a partnership based on some capital as well as some capabilities. Whereas when it's a control situation, the majority of your business is being transacted for, right? So you want to make sure that you get every penny you can, squeeze it all out. You want to make sure that the deal is structured appropriately, and we'll talk about that. So once you run this thing through an iterative process, and again, I'm not going to belabor that because I talked about it extensively in the sell-side masterclasses, now you find yourself with a whittled playing field of 1, 2, 3 private equity firms. And you might be faced with a variety of different options. One private equity firm might say, hey, we love your industry, Michael. Like, we're all in on this, and you're going to be our platform, and this is going to be our brand name. I want to do all these acquisitions, and we're going to make you the CEO, and you're feeling great. I'm getting all this money. I'm going to be CEO. This is fantastic. That might be an interesting opportunity for you, but you might have a shit ton of work to do. I don't know. Then, Michael, you might have another situation. You might have a private equity firm that says, hey, listen, we're looking at two businesses in your industry, Michael. One's a little bit bigger. It's got a better brand name. So we're going to combine those two. We're kind of working on the other one now. We want to do it simultaneously. So we will use your business, but you can kind of stick around. We definitely need you to roll equity, but you're not going to be the CEO. And you look at it and the economic terms are right. That might be a better situation for you. Just last week, I closed a transaction with Diligence Capital where they combined 3 fire protection companies, like on the first deal. And they used one of the brands. They combined 3 of them. One of them was our client, and the client was super happy with the way it went down. So you'll find different flavors as you deal with private equity firms. What I'm trying to impress upon you is every one of them is different. Every one of them may be contemplating different deals. Every one of them will have different ways in which they operate. Some are lower middle market private equity firms, right? They're only going to build a $100 million business. Some are kind of middle market or upper middle market. They're going to build a $500 million or $1 billion business. And so what sort of deep pockets does the private equity firm have? Are you dealing with somebody that has 500 million under assets under management or 2 billion, right? And so there's those sorts of considerations. And I think it allows you to really understand what sort of runway you're going to have. So again, I think the broad process of taking a lot of private equity firms, meeting the lower middle market, the upper middle market, where you're going to be a platform, where you're going to be a tuck-in, doing those sorts of things gives you some optionality. But at the end of the day, you're the one creating the vision. I want you to really think about this. Like, you need to be the one creating the vision for this business. You shouldn't be passive. Now, your vision can change, right? Your vision can change, but I think setting the vision for yourself is something like structuring boundaries, where the other party is going to very quickly self-select. Like, do I want to do business with Michael? Like, he's got this grandiose plan and he wants a financial sponsor that looks like this. That's not us. Well, that's great. That's great. You just got valuable information. That's not the right party. Don't waste time on them, because I can promise you there's scores of other private equity firms that'll fill right in where they've left. Don't fear offending any of these guys. Don't feel like you're cutting them out of the process, because they're a dime a dozen, okay? So now you've gone through this, and let's say that you, and I don't know who Michael is, but we're going to use him today. Michael, I appreciate your assistance. So Michael, you now have chosen the private equity firm that is going to put your face on the mug, so to speak, right? You're going to be the big daddy, the CEO. They're using your brand. You're the platform. And you've done a great job, because you've, in your sell side materials, as you were going through this process, you sat down with me and you said, Paul, there are 7 or 8 companies I want to acquire. And I've met with all of these guys. I know Jim, and I know Bob, and I know Helen, and I know their kids, and I know what they do. I know how they fit into our business. I kind of have a sense of what I would have to do in order to be able to buy them. So I've got my acquisition pipeline. You've got your financial plan. You've got your systems plan set up from a tech perspective. You're like, I need to revamp this tech system. It's going to shave a few basis points off our cost. You've got this plan all put together. The private equity firms loved it. They're giving you a great price. Now the deal's actually about to start, right? Now we're at ground zero, effectively. Now we're going to sign a letter of intent. And the letter of intent, I think, is important with private equity firms, and sometimes more important, because, you know, in any industry, when you're dealing with a strategic acquirer, and what I mean by a strategic acquirer is an acquirer that might be a publicly traded company or a large privately held business within your industry. They're very well known in the industry that you operate in. And if they're serial acquirers, meaning they go out and buy a lot of businesses, have done so for a long time, they are particularly concerned about their reputation. They don't want to be the company that goes out and buys a company and shits all over it and then gets a bad reputation, then no one else wants to do a deal with them. So they tend to be pretty careful. They tend to be more sophisticated on I shouldn't even use the word sophisticated. They tend to be more cautious on the front end when they sign letters of intent, and they want to make sure they anticipate what they might find in diligence. They're also familiar with your industry, so they can ask you a lot of questions that sometimes private equity firms can't, because they actually know what you do intimately. And so they can suss out problems usually on the front end of signing a letter of intent. Private equity firms don't, however, unless they have a tremendous amount of experience in your industry. What a private equity firm will often do is bring on outside experts. They'll sign a letter of intent, and then their diligence process is often extensive. They're going to bring in outside industry experts. They're going to bring in large accounting firms to do transaction services, quality of earnings reports. They will bring in a lot of consultants, and private equity firms will spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on due diligence, which is a multi-month process. And I think one of the things you should be concerned with if you're a seller about to sign with a private equity firm is if this is a new industry for them, they are probably going to learn a lot, not only about your business, but about the industry after they sign the letter of intent. And you might be at risk for a retrade. And what's a retrade? A retrade is, I'm giving you $100 million for your business, sign this letter of intent. You say, fine, I'll sign the letter of intent. We sign the letter of intent. Now I start doing all this diligence and I'm like, yeah, I didn't really realize how these widgets were made. It doesn't, I don't know if we're going to be able to do exactly what we want and you're like, well, that's how widgets are made. And I'm just like, oh, I didn't know that. I got this expert guy over telling me that widgets are made differently. And I'm not quite sure. So I think we're going to have to make a new widget conveyor belt, which is going to cost us money. And so I'm going to ding you on the purchase price. Congratulations. It's now a $90 million deal. And so you're violently upset because you're like, this private equity firm, these guys are morons. They've never run a business in their life. And the private equity firm's like, I don't know. We're talking to these experts out there and they're telling us that you're not right. And so you end up running into these sorts of things with private equity far more than you do with strategics, which is why I'm going to say it publicly. I'm always a little bit more nervous when private equity is very heavy for me in a process, especially private equity that does not have experience in the particular industry I'm dealing with, because I know the incidence of a retrade could be dramatically higher than if I'm dealing with an experienced private equity firm or a strategic. So I just want you to make a little mental note of that as we walk through this process. So if private equity has reached out to you, feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me on the contact form below in the description, as well as you can always reach me on LinkedIn. I'm Paul Giannamore. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you on the next one.